Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you, as always, by InsideThePenguins.com, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Brlansky, joined, as always, by Nick Horwat, and there's plenty of roster moves that we have to discuss today. Horwat, I was getting ready to think about this episode and what we were going to talk about. We have plenty of listener questions, which is what we're going to finish the show off with. So thank you to our 4 listeners who ended up sending us questions. We're going to get to all 4 of them in the final segment of the show. But when I was thinking about today's show, I was like, okay, what's happened? I don't really want to talk much about the Washington game as a whole, just because we do our review. We talked about it. I talked about it yesterday. There's a lot that needs to be left behind about the Washington game. But then I thought, there's a lot of roster moves that have happened, and there's some roster moves that could happen in the near future that we should definitely discuss. So we're going to talk about the right wings because that depth is starting to change. It looks like there could be a player that's becoming a fan favorite that ends up getting sent down. There's a player that a lot of people are questioning where he's at, what his role is going to be, that is down in the minor leagues now, getting ready to play his first game action of the 2023-24 season. And then defense. I talked about Ryan Graves, I think 3 times out of 3 days so far this week. We're going to make it 4 times because, I mean, he's one of the top stories surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins right now. But Horwat, after that game on Tuesday night against the Washington Capitals, how imperative is it that they're able to bounce back tonight in a place that me and you both know has not historically been kind to the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Sidney Crosby era?
It hasn't historically been kind, but we know that the Penguins have gotten better results, at least recently. I'd say that, of course, it's important. You pretty much have to continue the trend of play that you had in the second 2 periods against Washington.
Yeah.
Ignore the first. They played extremely well in the second and third. Again, just not enough. This time around, you maintain that trend against. Yeah, they're still the best team in the league, but you get a couple early ones against this team and against Boston, and the next thing you know, you're riding a little bit higher. I think as much as Boston is still putting up this fantastic record, I still feel like they're a team that the Penguins can come in at any point and look like a better team then. I forget what the head-to-head results were last year, but I think there's still some confidence to be had from how you were able to respond after spotting Washington 4 and breeding that confidence into tonight.
Yeah, the one big thing for the Boston Bruins Pittsburgh Penguins matchup that we're not going to see is Patrice Bergeron. That's obviously been one of the big stories for the Bruins, is that they're still tops in the Atlantic Division without their captain, without the multi-time Selke Award winner that the Selke is going to be renamed after at some point. I'm guaranteeing it at some point. The Selke is going to become the Patrice Bergeron Award. But Bergeron had always had Crosby's number, at least defensively. He was able to shut down Crosby more often than not. He's not there. Are the Bruins able to get somebody else that's able to shut down Sidney Crosby, or does that change the face of this matchup? That's something we're going to have to keep an eye on and monitor tonight. Should be a good game. That is an ESPN exclusive, not ESPN Plus, so you'll be able to find it on ESPN proper later this evening. But let's get into some of these roster moves, the ones that have happened, the ones that might happen, that we're going to try to forecast here in the next couple of minutes. The right wing position is starting to look a lot deeper for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Obviously, Rickard Rakell has come back and has been back for a while now. He has 5 points in his last 6 games, so he's performing better. But Brian Rust returns against the Washington Capitals, a huge return for the Pittsburgh Penguins to get Rusty back. He played on the second line and also on the second power play unit, finished with 16 minutes, 47 seconds of ice time, 1 shot on goal, and 1 hit. What did you think of Rusty in his first game back?
It's just one of those regular first game backs. You're just trying to get your legs under you. It's not. It was one of those first game backs where, hey, he's here. You're not going to get too much, it seems. He just wasn't too noticeable, but he was definitely, starting to filter the lineup to where it should be as a fully healthy squad. And I don't know, I think maybe more been expected, but he's got time to get his feet under him. It was a month off, and relatively quickly did he return to the team. It's not like he had a week's worth of practices. He only skated with the team, I think, twice, maybe 3 times at the most. So he hasn't had much time back yet. So I'd say the first game, it was good to get the feet under him. I'd expect a little bit more this time around.
Yeah, first game action in over a month, like you mentioned. His last game was against the Tampa Bay Lightning at the beginning of December. And as we'll reference several times on this episode, Kyle Dubas had his biweekly GM show yesterday with friend of the show, Josh Getzoff, on 105.9 The X. And Getzoff mentioned, or not Getzoff, but Dubas actually mentioned that, this is not an ideal situation to bring him back on Tuesday because the team practiced Thursday and Friday, but then he only had a morning skate on Saturday, a morning skate on Sunday, a day off on Monday, and then morning skate on Tuesday morning and goes into game action. So not an ideal situation to bring him back, but I thought he performed well. I thought the second line looked pretty good with him on it. Obviously, when he went down, he had been playing a lot with the first line of Sidney Crosby and Jake Gensel, so it might take a second for him to get on the same page with Riley Smith and Evgeny Malkin as well. Something to keep an eye on. I think Brian Rust looked good, and I think you're going to see closer to what you saw earlier in the season as he starts to ramp back up into game action. Speaking of a right winger that played on the second line with Malkin and Riley Smith, Valtteri Puustinen has seen his role decrease not just at 5-on-5 by bouncing down to the bottom six and playing on the third line, but also being taken off that second power play unit in favor of Brian Rust. And also, he's had his lowest ice time since coming up the last two games. Not only that, but he's had the lowest ice time of anybody on the Pittsburgh Penguins over the last two outings. Holding the lead against the New York Islanders, Valtteri Puustinen saw only 4 shifts in the third period, and you thought, okay, maybe because his defensive game isn't quite there, Mike Sullivan wants to protect the lead, wants to protect Valtteri Puustinen from putting him out there against an Islanders team that was pushing really hard in the third period. Fine, I get it. But then again, coming from behind against the Washington Capitals, down a goal going into the third period, Valtteri Puustinen gets only 3 shifts. And I thought maybe there was a lot of power plays, but 3 on the Penguin side, 2 on the Washington Capitals side, a lot of 5-on-5 ice time. Still only 3 shifts in the third period for Valtteri Puustinen. It seems like his role is slowly getting lower and lower on this Pittsburgh Penguins team as of late.
Yeah, it's beginning to get a little more noticeable. Once he was dropped to the third line, it was you don't want to say the nail in the coffin on his time here because he's still going to play, still going to perform. He had, in that Islanders game, it was only however many shifts, 7 or so minutes. I think is, we discussed this even. He still had a point. He still was able to create offense with his little bit of time on ice. If this is the situation the Penguins find to be correct for him, I mean, so be it. But it doesn't feel right because in those limited opportunities he's still producing. I think maybe the Washington game was just the factor that Brian Rust was returning. That's what got him taken off the second power play unit in the first place. And just the ice time is going to continue to go down as the team gets healthy around him. But I would say overall, it's we're just starting to see a lower role for him.
Yeah, you would hope that going forward, he would be able to get into these games at some of these moments. Like down a goal in the third period, you would hope that he'd get into that game, especially because if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, you want to be able to rely on your third line to go out there and win their shift and produce some offense and maybe even get that tying goal. To only give them 3 opportunities in the third period, I understand it. You might want to double shift the Crosby line. You might want to double shift the Malkin line. But also, it feels like when he's going out there and being the player that is utilized the least in back-to-back games. Now, of course, 1 is, an occurrence, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern. We'll see what happens later tonight and how the game plays out against the Boston Bruins. But it certainly seems like Valtteri Puustinen is going to have to step his game up to get that ice time again because he's performed well since coming up. But at the same time, you look at the talent that the Penguins have on the right side, and somebody else we're going to mention is starting to knock on the door of a return, then he's going to have to produce to be able to stay in the lineup and stay at the NHL level.
Yeah, he's going to have to. It's a, like we discussed with so many different things, it's a what have you done for me lately league.
It is.
Yeah. And for someone in Valtteri Puustinen's position, just a couple of games off like that, it's not ideal. Even if it is just a couple, even if he is still getting assists, you need to see goals from him. You need to see that offense production sort of wake up and remain consistent. And it's not like it hasn't been there. He's just in a very odd situation because he is good enough to play in the NHL. We've seen it, but he's not necessarily good enough to blow you away and remain an NHL regular. And especially with the role that he's being given as a right now a third line player. That's just not where he's going to sit in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just in that weird position because Mike Sullivan likes his depth lines to be a little more defensively minded, and the team's getting healthy around him. Jesse Puljujarvi might be hitting the road to come to Pittsburgh soon. So the spot's just going to get taken. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, as of yesterday, Jesse Puljujarvi was playing and practicing with the Pittsburgh Penguins in Pittsburgh before they departed for Boston. He went in a similar direction. He headed northeast, but he didn't go all the way to Boston with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Mm-hmm. He stopped off at Wilkes-Barre Scranton, where he will be spending some time trying to get back into game action, back into game shape with the Pittsburgh Penguins, because he is going to sign a PTO, an AHL PTO with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, meaning he can play up to 25 games with the organization before needing to sign an actual contract. Kyle Dubas mentioned on the GM show yesterday that, quote, he would be a massive boost if he can bring what he did in Edmonton 2 years ago to the table here in Pittsburgh. In Edmonton 2 years ago, 2021-22, he scored 36 points, including 14 goals for the Edmonton Oilers in a depth role. If he could bring that to Pittsburgh, it certainly would be nice, but could Puljujarvi's emergence, and again, doesn't mean he's going to sign an NHL contract. It seems like the Penguins have high hopes for him, high expectations, but you have to see how he performs once he gets back into game action. Similar thing happened earlier this season with Mark Pysyk. He got the PTO. He played a couple of games at Wilkes-Barre, and they decided, you know what, it's not for us, and they let him go. And he went and signed somewhere else. Now, Jesse Puljujarvi, I think, is a little bit more, more along the ways of he's going to probably have more of an opportunity in Pittsburgh. There's a likelier opportunity for him to sign that contract, but could his emergence mean the end of Valtteri Pustinen's stint in Pittsburgh?
I don't know about it completely.
Not just his first stint, but
yeah. But I still don't know about completely, because there are still lineups you can create with both of them in it.
We did it on Tuesday.
Exactly. So it's still possible that some shifting and some changes happen. Matt Nieto getting placed on LTIR doesn't help a lot of things. And not only that, but Sullivan's comments of, there likely won't be any updates until you see him on the ice again. So expect that to kind of play a factor in Matt Nieto's return. So there are still ways you can create lineups with both of them in it, but it does seem like at the moment that Pustinen's spot in the lineup kind of rides on how Puljujarvi performs and what he does. So, which isn't a bad trade-off for the Penguins either. This is a good situation to have, in a way that you're getting a good NHL player in the lineup regardless. Mm-hmm. And you're getting a young NHL player in the lineup regardless. They both bring their own set of assets to the table. And in terms of Puljujarvi, getting up to 25 games on an AHL PTO, you're looking at him and all of a sudden as a free trade deadline acquisition, because we love throwing that weird label around, right? Hey, he's returning from injury. He's another trade deadline acquisition. You could do that with Puljujarvi now if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, looking at this position of the right wing for the Pittsburgh Penguins, a couple of weeks ago, we would have said, it's very, very weak right now. They need help at the right side of the ice because Raquel was injured. Brian Rust was recently injured. And you looked at it and said, well, Drew O'Connor is going to move from his left wing to his right wing. We're going to see how he's been able to do. He's okay. He can play that, and he's proven that he can play on that off wing. But at the same time, now you look at it with everybody getting healthy. You have Rust and Raquel in the top six. You have Pustin, who is performing at a level that is commensurate to an NHL player, and he does deserve his opportunities. Radim Zohorna has struggled, but at one time this season, Radim Zohorna was an NHL caliber right winger. He was performing at that level. He hasn't as of late, and that's why he's found himself outside of a lineup spot. And Jeff Carter has been what you want Jeff Carter to be from a fourth line right wing. You throw Jesse Puljujarvi into that mix, and it suddenly looks very crowded on the right side for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I would like to see Valtteri Pustin get more of an opportunity. I'd like to see him get a little bit more ice time. But at the same time, if he gets sent back down, that's not the end of Valtteri Pustin with the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's just the end of his technically second stint, because his first stint was a couple of years ago when he had one game against Vegas. But his first actual stint in the NHL where he got some actual playing time, some actual run, he's performed well, and there's certainly a bright future there. But at the same time, if Jesse Puljujarvi can help you more in the meantime, that's why he would probably be brought up. And Puljujarvi brings a more complete game, a more defensive game, like you mentioned. And you gave me the official scouting report the other day. You shared an elevator with Jesse Puljujarvi down to the locker room, and you said, tall. Tall is the official scouting report on Jesse Puljujarvi.
Big man. I think anyone can read the the height and weight of them on NHL.com and understand that as well. But
yeah,
no,
but they lie there. They lie on there. You got us the official like eye test standing next to you scouting report.
He's a big dude. He could see it on the ice too. I think I said this to you too. I think this was on the podcast. I even said it. He has the figure of Evgeny Malkin, but uses Martin St. Louis' stick. That hunch is incredible. But he's got a great shot with it, and he knows how to skate really well. And he seems to have some good foot speed even after coming off of a double hip surgery. So there's some great positives that can be had from Jesse Puljujarvi, and I'm excited to see the progress he makes and where things go from here.
Yeah, we'll see where he lines up when it gets to Wilkes-Barre Scranton, because I don't think it would take 25 games for them to figure it out. But again, he came to Pittsburgh on a free agent tryout, and the first 10 days were covered. Since then, which has been about 3 weeks, he's been staying in Pittsburgh on his dime and staying with the Penguins organization on his dime, which says something about his desire to play for this organization. So Kyle Dubas said as much again yesterday on the GM show. I told you we're going to reference it a bunch because everything Dubas says carries a lot of weight in this organization, and he says a whole lot more than the last regime. So, but no, it's interesting to see what Puljujarvi is taking that next step. Sullivan alluded to it. Dubas confirmed it yesterday. Now all we have to do is sit there and monitor what he's able to do in Northeast Pennsylvania and wherever that team ends up playing their games. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, hey, All-Star rosters are revealed tonight. Let's take a prediction, take a crack at trying to predict who's going to be on it from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then some changes on the back end as well. We'll talk about that after the break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. The NHL All-Star rosters will be revealed tonight during the Pittsburgh Penguins Boston Bruins matchup on ESPN. The question becomes, obviously this is going to be outdated in 10 hours, 12 hours at some point, whenever they announce the actual Eastern Conference roster. I think is pregame on that show. But which Penguins do you think make the cut? Both of us said that there's 3 players in mind. I think 2 of them are likely to make it, and one of them I'd like to see, but probably doesn't get the nod. Who do you have making the NHL All-Star game from the Pittsburgh Penguins?
So as of right now, the Penguins each team is only getting 1 nominee, and then the fans will vote on 12 more. Honestly, it seems like only 1 Penguin's going to make it, considering how fan vote goes. And I would say that my top guess right now is for, he's having a great season, obviously, and just a namesake, Sidney Crosby. That's the easy softball. It's right there in the easy option for you. And ironically enough, he's not even leading the Penguins in points, which is my second name, Jake Guentzel.
Yeah. Sidney Crosby's an 8-time NHL All-Star at this point. He's probably gone to less than 4.
I think it's 9, isn't it?
He's 8-time according to Hockey Reference.
That's Hockey Reference. I think counts by voted after the season, NHL All-Star or like All-Star team
or All-Pro.
All-Pro, something like that, because quick reference, I think the Penguins Twitter account last year said it was his 9th whenever he was voted to go to Florida.
Yeah, but still, he's probably not gone to more than 4. Actually attended more than 4 All-Star games, but I would assume it's Sidney Crosby as well. Jake Guentzel does lead the Pittsburgh Penguins in points right now and assists, and I would assume that he probably has an opportunity to get there in the fan vote, simply because the other good teams in the Metro right now, the Philadelphia Flyers, they have a big fan base, but like how many people outside of Philadelphia are going to know anybody from Philadelphia right now to send them to the All-Star game? Columbus, same thing. They have a lot of names there, but how many of them are going to go to the All-Star game? I think Guentzel ends up getting a ticket. And the third name that I have that I'd like to see go, and I think he's certainly deserved of being an NHL All-Star this season, is Chris Letang. He's a 2-time NHL All-Star. This would be his 3rd trip there, at least according to Hockey Reference, which interesting. I'd have to keep an eye on that.
I had the numbers in my story. I just don't remember exactly. The Penguins tweeted last year to be Crosby's 9th. I believe it would only be Guentzel's 2nd.
It would be Crosby's 9th, which means he's an 8-time All-Star.
It would be his 10th.
Oh, okay.
Last year was his 9th. Sorry. This would be his 10th.
All right.
I believe it would be Guentzel's 3rd, but 2nd that he attended. Because he got injured in 2020, then he got injured. And for Letang, it'd be like his 6th or something, 6th or 7th. or even
Interesting.
8th. Yeah, he's been to quite a few because he's gone in place of Malkin and Crosby, who have never wanted to go.
That might be why what Hockey Reference doesn't do. They might do the selection who was voted and not who actually went.
I don't know how they do it, but that
Who
being
knows?
said,
Either way,
those are the 3
Crosby,
names.
Gensel, Letang. There you go.
Yeah, those are the 3 names. Malkin would be fun, but just the inconsistency fights, too much to fight through. Erik Karlsson's an interesting option.
He might get the fan vote because it's a fan vote.
Yeah, but there's been a lot of revisionist history on Erik Karlsson this year because, again, welcome to the "What have you done for me lately" league.
Yeah.
And for Erik Karlsson, it is not too much.
No. I mean, he had that one stretch. We keep looking back at that one stretch and hoping that he's going to duplicate it at some point here. But until that happens, I would not place Erik Karlsson on my All-Star ballot, to be completely honest. Speaking of the blue line, let's move over to the blue line right now because there were some changes made there, as well as a lot of people noticed on the broadcast on Tuesday. Ryan Graves and P.O. Joseph switched spots. That was mid-game against Washington following the first period. The second and third periods, they kept the same pairings. Joseph and Karlsson finished with 9 minutes and 44 seconds of ice time, 81% of the expected goals. But again, that was second and third period against Washington when the Capitals were not all too concerned about creating offense, or at the very least weren't actually creating offense and pushing to create that offense. Joseph and Karlsson finished with 14 shot attempts, 4 and 7 shot attempts allowed. Meanwhile, Ryan Graves and Chad Ruhwedel finished with 5 minutes and 4 seconds of ice time together, 10 shot attempts for, 1 shot attempt against. So solid, but again, albeit in a game where the Washington Capitals were simply getting to the red line, dumping the puck deep, and then retreating to make sure they didn't give up that all-important tying goal.
Yeah, it was an interesting back half of the game to try and read. It was almost all Penguins, but that's because it really did seem like Washington just took the foot off the brakes. I forget how many shots they had in those last 2 periods. It was under 10, I think, combined.
There was not many.
Yeah. They weren't testing Nedeljkovic that much, so it's not even like you could say Nedeljkovic came in and had a good game.
Yeah, he had 14 saves on 15 shots.
Yeah, so, which is good, which is great, by the way. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah,
it's harder to read whenever you're coming in relief, and we're also not here to talk about Nedeljkovic. So in the defense, you noticed it pretty quickly that Ryan Graves was adjusted to the third line because it was one of those things that you're looking for. A puck goes off of Ryan Graves in the first period. He's on the ice for 3 of those 4 goals. You quickly take a look at the stat sheet after the first period and go, all right, look at that time on ice. I remember I circled it. I don't know where my sheet is. I circled it on the sheet and said, let's see how much higher it goes from here. Didn't get that much higher for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it to be 0 because it's a little harder to bench defensemen than it is forwards.
Especially when they play on the penalty kill.
Yeah. So it didn't go too much higher from there, and I now have to reload into the media site.
Yeah, with Ryan Graves, I mean, we've talked about him ad nauseum. There's obviously something that needs to be fixed there because the Pittsburgh Penguins can't afford him to continue to perform the way he has through the first 36 games of the season. And you saw what happened at practice yesterday. Mike Sullivan rang true to that lineup decision on Tuesday night. He was able in practice yesterday to put Joseph and Karlsson together once again. Graves and Ruhwedel did practice together, but they were also joined by Ryan Shea, who was recalled in favor of the John Ludwig injury news, which we'll get to in just a minute. So I don't know if we'll see Ryan Shea get into a game. I know that his performance has been polarizing. There are some people that love what Ryan Shea has done so far this season. There are some people that don't like what Ryan Shea has been this season, but considering the person that's holding him out of the lineup is Chad Ruhwedel, who has been nothing spectacular at this point, there's a chance that you could see one of Ryan Shea or Chad Ruhwedel playing alongside Ryan Graves in the bottom pairing tonight.
Yeah, Ryan Shea has been Ryan Shea. He earned his spot to start the year as the extra defenseman, and then make his way into the lineup. And Chad Ruhwedel very much has just been Chad Ruhwedel, just kind of almost aging out of his role as being that seventh guy of just, hey, he's able to slot in whenever he's ready. He's not going to bring you much. He almost had a goal. He almost had one.
He scored a goal. It just didn't count.
It really was offside by a mile, though.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but still, it's the depth that we'll keep referencing what Kyle Dubas said this time from the episode before this is from his press conference, sorry, that he wants someone to take that third pairing and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
We're still kind of waiting on that almost. I mean, P.O. Joseph may have been given that opportunity again, but is now being forced to play on the second line. So maybe if he's able to run with something on the second line, it translates to the third. There's going to be a lot of, again, I think we said this last episode, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the defense going forward.
Yeah.
We saw it right away. Well, here the changes are already happening. And we didn't even realize at the time of recording that John Ludwig wasn't going to play because of an injury.
Yeah.
And is now on LTIR. So we're going to miss him for a while. And there goes a lot of physicality. Could have really used it against Washington. Might even need it tonight against Boston.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a bigger blow than what we think, because I mean, Nolan Chari can throw the body around. That's great. There's really no one else. I mean, there's guys that like to, but it's not as noticeable. John Ludwig hits hard.
Yeah, he hits hard, and he hits in the open ice, which is something that not a lot of people do in the NHL, let alone with the Pittsburgh Penguins anymore. But the Pens are in a precarious position on the back end because you have Ryan Graves, who's struggling to the point where now he's been demoted, where he started the season on the first pairing next to Chris Letang. He's now been demoted to the third pairing, and the person that is replacing him is P.O. Joseph, who the only reason he got into a game on Tuesday was because of an injury. So he was a guy that wasn't even in your lineup, was not able to crack your top six, and now he's going to be playing 25 minutes a night next to Erik Karlsson. He stepped up to the challenge in the past, but that's a precarious position for the Pittsburgh Penguins. You have two huge question marks on second left defenseman and third left defenseman. The good thing is Marcus Pettersson looks great, but at the same time, I mean, you're also kind of out of options on that left side. I mean, what does Jack Rathbone have? He's more of an offensive defenseman, but he's somebody that hasn't been given an opportunity at the NHL level yet. Does he get one of those going forward, especially if P.O. Joseph falters or if Ryan Graves continues to falter? It's an interesting position that they find themselves in, and they're going to need their goaltenders, which it's one game. But January Jari looked like he was in full force, which is not a good thing for the Penguins on Tuesday. We'll see who gets to start tonight. I would think, and this is going to be outdated probably in 2 hours when they take the ice for morning skate. I would think they go back to Jari to try to say, listen, that was one night. Get your confidence back. Go get them against Boston.
Hey, you never know, though. And one thing that's really scary that I thought of, how much time, it was a year to the day of the Winter Classic last year. Which game did he have more time on ice in?
Yeah, it was the Winter Classic because he actually made it through the first period in the Winter Classic.
He played 15:30 in the Winter Classic. He played 13:02, I believe, last night. So
on January 2nd, let's just not play Tristan Jarry on January 2nd. How about that's a rule moving forward?
In the last 2 years, he's combined for just under half of a game of hockey.
Yeah. Been relieved in both, but for different reasons. One was an injury, one was yikes. But the last thing I want to talk about here is obviously the injury news. You've mentioned it. We've alluded to it a couple times on the show, but Matt Nieto officially on long-term injured reserve. He's already missed a month due to injury. And as you said, Mike Sullivan yesterday said, until you see the whites of his eyes, don't ask me again.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, basically. And then Dubas on the GM show said they expect Ludwig to be out at least a month. This is the second time John Ludwig has found himself on the injured reserve. He plays that physical style of the game. Sometimes that's going to be hard for the body to keep up, especially at the NHL level, a level he has not played at. The hits are a little bit harder. Yeah, they come in a little bit faster. So John Ludwig's still adjusting in that way, and it's cost him some games here as he's going to miss at least a month for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But we're going to take a quick break. When we return, got a lot of listener questions to get to. We'll run through 4 of them after this break. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. Pens versus Bruins later tonight should be a good matchup on ESPN. I would like to watch a game on Sportsnet Pittsburgh at some point here. They're on NHL Network, I believe, on Saturday or next Monday, one of the 2 days. I hope that's a Sportsnet Pittsburgh game because I miss my buddy Josh Getzoff. I miss listening to Getzoff over Bucci and Weeks.
Am I the only one that likes Buccigross? I got a
You
couple of
might be.
texts about him too. That was my only response. I'm the only one that enjoys listening to him.
It's not his fault entirely, because I do feel like NHL, or not NHL, ESPN tones down the crowd noise in their broadcast, which is a horrible idea. This obviously ESPN does not know much about hockey. And then I texted a couple of our buddies and friends of the show and said, this is more boring than watching C-SPAN. They brought no life to the broadcast on Tuesday, and maybe it was just Tuesday, but yeah, let's just say Josh Getzoff is sorely missed after that game, and will probably be sorely missed after tonight's game as well. We'll see him back, I believe, one of those 2 days Saturday. I think usually when it's NHL Network, they have the actual announcers from the game still doing it. So,
Yeah.
but let's get into some listener questions here. Ceci asks, who did POJ play with last season? I thought it was Tanger. Why not give him that chance? Don't Tanger and PO click on and off the ice? Ceci's correct. P.O. Joseph and Chris Letang, both French-Canadian, both enjoy spending time with each other off the ice and did play together a substantial amount of time on the ice yesterday. When you look at last season. But if you look at last season for P.O. Joseph, the most time on ice he had was with Chad Ruhwedel, 304 minutes. He played 215 minutes with Jeff Petrie, 198 minutes with Jan Ruda, and 174 minutes with Chris Letang. Together, Letang and P.O. Joseph had 49.2% of the expected goals when on the ice at 5-on-5. So not great, but not horrible results with POJ and Tanger. The only thing there is last year, neither of them wanted to really clear out the net front. I think Letang has grown in that area, which crazy to say that of the two, a 24-year-old and a 36-year-old, that the 36-year-old is the one that grew. But at the same time, I would say you need to see what POJ looks like a little bit more in the lineup. He's only played 4 of the last 4 of the last 32 games. So you got to see him in the lineup a little bit more, I think, before you put him up there with Chris Letang. Obviously, he's playing with Erik Karlsson, which is equally as big of a responsibility when it comes to ice time. But, I think Chris Letang's in on more lofty moments more often than not. So I'd see them going together maybe, but again, need to see P.O. Joseph perform a little bit better before I put him up on the first pairing.
Oh yeah, it's going to take a minute for that to grow into happening. I think we saw it early in POJ's career, but I think that was out of necessity for the team.
Yeah.
I remember that left side was banged up back then. That was the empty arena year, bubble year. So that was a bit of a different situation. We're coming into this time around. I mean, POJ he hasn't had a great season. He's played in 9 games in total, I think.
Yeah.
Has kind of been on and off. I asked him, how he felt his season has gone yesterday, and I'm forgetting his response, but I need to get back around to it. But it hasn't been easy. It's been a bit of a struggle, and I think everyone's kind of aware of that. But he's getting this opportunity. And you know what? And I don't hate the idea of him working with Letang either. Those two do have a chemistry on and off the ice. Those two actually the other day were having a pretty loud discussion, totally in French. No one could understand it. I asked Josh Yeo if he knew any French, and he said no. So it's those two have a good communication with each other, both on and off the ice. They could definitely be something, but it would just take some getting used to. And also, again, we just need to see what Joseph can do this year, because it hasn't been as good as last year. Just hasn't.
Yeah, he's struggled to stay in the lineup. So putting him up on the first pairing is not something that I would do right away, but it's certainly not something, Ceci, that I would rule out, because those two do have a history together. And like Horwat, you and Ceci, as mentioned, they have a connection off the ice as well, which sometimes leads to some better play on the ice. But next question we go to is Andrew Baker. He asks, many points have been lost due to poor starts. It feels like this problem, it happens every 3 to 4 games. Whose fault do you feel this is? And what needs to change to prevent this problem, Horwat?
I'd have to really look into what has been happening this year. Last year was pretty obvious that it was the goaltending. I remember Jari would give up goals in opening minutes pretty often, forcing the Penguins to play from behind. This time around, it doesn't seem it's too much like that. He's really honed things in those opening minutes. Yeah, this was
Tuesday.
This Washington game, not a great example.
Yeah.
That was a perfectly placed shot from Tom Wilson, though.
Better position and gets that shot knocked into the corner, though, in my opinion, personally.
Absolutely. But it's, I don't want to say it's too much of Jari this year.
No.
But again, I haven't noticed the starts being totally terrible. Again, I'd have to look back at this little anecdote, which I don't totally disagree with. So I do just need to look into it a little bit more. I can just tell you that last year was 1,000% Jari missing pucks in opening minutes.
Yeah, and it's funny too because again, it's a "what have you done for me lately" league. We've mentioned that 6 or 7 times on this podcast. If you remember, in the first 15 or 16 games, the Penguins had scored the opening goal in every one but like 2 or 3.
Oh yeah,
they were scoring first a lot, and then all of a sudden, you saw as the year went on, they came out in games, and the second period has turned into their bread and butter and been a lot better. And the adjustments and getting their feet underneath them and then going, and that's obviously something you can't continue to do. It's hard to come back in this league, especially with the talent that is on the other 31 NHL teams. And I'll mention again, Kyle Dubas yesterday mentioning that, basically he's come to expect that because of the team's age, that they're going to have nights like that. They're going to have off nights because it's just a long NHL season. And let's face it, the Pittsburgh Penguins while they are the oldest team in the National Hockey League, they're the oldest team in North American sports right now. And he said he puts the onus on the players to fight through it and figure out ways to come out with victories anyway when they're not playing their best. I would tend to agree. At the end of the day, the coaches, they can give your rah-rah speeches. We saw Mike Sullivan on Tuesday. He called a timeout and just absolutely berated this team on the bench. At the end of the day, it's on the players if they want to come out and, crap the bed. They're going to come out and crap the bed. They just can't do that. So it's on them coming out and making sure that they are on their game from the beginning. And if they're not going to have the best night, if they are going to have an off night, they have to be able to protect their own net and keep themselves in it. And that's not what they did Tuesday. They didn't protect their net. They didn't keep themselves in it. They went down 4-0 and then they kicked it on. But if they would have at least protected their own net and made it, even if that was 3-0 or 2-0, Pittsburgh Penguins probably walk away with the win because they were the better team from the 13-minute mark of the first period until triple zeros. So, at the end of the day, they're better than a lot of these teams in the National Hockey League. It's just a matter of putting 60 minutes together. And man, that seems like something we've said so many times over the years.
Doesn't it always? Tell you what, though, that game would have been completely different had Sid been a foot behind the blue line. Or even if Jeff Carter found that puck sitting in the crease, because both of those plays happened before the fourth goal.
Yeah.
And those are momentum swinging plays right there. But even without those two opportunities, the Penguins battled back. And again, you just don't allow a fourth. It's a completely different game.
Yeah.
And that fourth one just had to be. It just had to be, didn't it? Alex Ovechkin on the power play from a much different spot, though.
Yeah, and he said it was by coincidence. It just they said, "Are you guys working on that in the intermission break?" And he said, "No, I just found myself there. The puck found me, and I shot the puck."
Because it didn't look like the most set up shot he's ever had. So
no, I mean, and you can even go back before that, and this might be something that leads to what we talked about in the first segment. Valtteri Puustinen takes a bad offensive zone penalty. Usually, if you do that, Mike Sullivan kind of tightens the strings a little bit, keeps you on the bench a little bit. Maybe that's what led to it too, a bad offensive penalty in the first period. But at the same time, I believe it was Lars Eller or somebody in the second period took a similar penalty. It was Drew O'Connor took the similar penalty in the second period where he in the offensive zone. It was not a strong call. It was that slashing call, but at the same time, you can't take offensive zone penalties in this league, especially when you have the momentum and you're trying to come from behind.
Both Penguins penalties against Washington were those slashing calls where the stick falls out of the opponent's hands very easily.
Yeah.
And it was Jeff Carter, by the way. But both of them were that same kind of just getting the stick over to make a play and whoopsies. Yeah, no, it's Kyle Dubas didn't sound very pleased from the press box either. No one seemed they were weak calls. They were. There's no other way around it.
Rasmus Sandin needs to do some wrist curls.
Get some of those wide receiver gloves.
Yeah, or just not be. Never mind. I'm not going to say that. Let's move on to the next question. Jordan Boker 4869 asks: is someone like a Jake Middleton from Minnesota somebody that they could go after to play with Carlson until Graves figures his crap out? I put figures his crap out. Jordan said figures it out, but yeah, it's crap.
I don't know much about Jake Middleton. I'll
Well,
have
I
to.
could take the baton from you on that one. I looked it up, looked at some of his numbers, looked at what he's doing up there in the state of hockey. Middleton currently playing on the top pair with rookie Brock Faber, and that is because of injuries. Jake Middleton is not their top option on the left side, but injuries to Jared Spurgeon. I believe Jonas Brodin is up there and injured as well. Has Jake Middleton needing to play top pair minutes with a rookie phenom in Brock Faber, who's had a great year on the right side, but Middleton is signed for this year and next at $2.45 million. And yes, that's not a horrible cap hit, especially if you get any retention on it. But at the same time, if you bring him in for 2.45, have him on the books for next year, and Ryan Graves does figure it out, now you have a third pairing defenseman for $2.5 million. And it's already an expensive defense that has been underperforming. Not to mention the fact that Jake Middleton's underlying numbers aren't spectacular, but at the same time, he's big, he's burly, he'd be great at clearing out the net front. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, which immediately makes him the second biggest defenseman on this team behind Ryan Graves, who, as we've mentioned, doesn't use his size very often. So Jake Middleton does more so. So you get that in exchange as well. But again, I'm not exactly sure what the Penguins would have to give up to get Jake Middleton if they'd be able to get that cap hit lower, because the Penguins are right up against the ceiling. They'd probably have to either get the retention, which would cost more in draft capital and prospects, or they'd have to send money back, which again could be taken away. I don't know who they'd be taking away at that point. Maybe taking away Drew O'Connor at that point, which I don't think the Pittsburgh Penguins want to do. I think they like O'Connor this season.
They do like O'Connor this season. They like him a lot this year. As for Jake Middleton, it's not totally terrible. It's just tough to picture because, the Penguins might be looking for a defenseman, but how much do they want to spend on him? I mean,
yep.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, what'd you say? How much did you say Middleton cost?
2.45. I think that's similar to what Ilya Lyubushkin makes in Anaheim.
Oh, dang. That's sick. It really just does depend on how much they want to spend, and also how much they want to spend possibly into next season.
Yes.
Do they just want to get an easy rental piece for now, or do they really want to drive home with someone for a couple of seasons? I mean, the defensive depth on this team, we keep discussing it. They have options. Lyubushkin's 275, so he's a little more expensive.
He's a little more, but he's on the last year of his contract, so he'd be a pure rental.
Yeah. But you look at that depth that they have in the minors too. I mean, if you're looking for third pairing guys, they have those options. It is just a matter of finding someone who's a second pairing guy that can take the place of Ryan Graves for the time until he maybe figures everything out.
Yeah.
It's going to be a confusing, interesting situation because, again, maybe one of those defensemen is already on the block as well. Who knows if POJ honestly sticks around too much longer. But I mean, regardless, if the Penguins are looking for defense, I guess Jake Middleton could be an option. It's just a matter of what they want to do with that extra year.
Yeah. Yeah, that it's interesting too, because I feel like there's a chance that you could acquire him and then flip him in the offseason for parts, because I mean, 1 year left at 2.45 for an NHL left defenseman is not too bad as far as what you could probably get for him on the trade market, but I'm not exactly sure if that would be the right answer for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm not exactly sure if he would be the right fit for the Pittsburgh Penguins in their current situation, especially because their hopes are probably that, Ryan Graves goes down to the third pairing, finds his game in 2 weeks, and then goes back up a brand new man. And if that's the case, they're not going to go out and they're not going to trade assets, especially because Kyle Dubas has said multiple times that he's not trying to trade away a lot of future assets to help the team right now. He'd like to bring in a couple of pieces. He's not opposed to that idea, but he said on so many occasions that he wants the young guys to step up and take the opportunity that is being afforded to them. And that's on the forward side. That's on the defensive side. Not Riley Smith, but Ryan Shea, the other RS, Ryan Shea, John Ludwig, Radim Zohorna, Valtteri Puustinen, and Drew O'Connor, even Jesse Puljujarvi, who's only 25 years old. These guys are getting opportunities. The Penguins are hoping that so they don't have to dip into their future assets, because they are aware that there's a rebuild coming and they'd like to keep as many as possible. They want these guys that are already in the organization to step up. So they're going to hold off as long as possible from making that trade and bringing in somebody from the outside, including a guy in Jacob Middleton, who, because of that extra year, is probably going to demand a little bit more scratch, even from a Minnesota Wild team that is outside the playoff picture as well. Last question here before we say goodbye for the day. Jason Michael, second question and 2 shows for Jason Michael. Thank you very much for sending us this one on Spotify. Asks, the Canes have been contacted about Michael Bunting's availability in the trade market. Interested to get your thoughts. Maybe use him as a second or third liner. Add some grit. Who has some scoring as well. This is confirmed by Elliot Freeman of 32 Thoughts, and Sportsnet says that teams are inquiring about Michael Bunting due to Carolina's goaltending issue and saying, hey, if you're desperate for a goaltender, we would like Michael Bunting, please. And, well, they've got a point. But on the Penguins side of things, I hate the price. Penguins have good goaltending for the first time in a long time. Would you be willing to trade from that area of surplus to try to help the bottom 6 with grit and scoring, which Michael Bunting does provide in spades?
But Michael Bunting fits everything this team needs.
He does.
He fits that. It's Tom Wilson-esque, where he can't score, where he can't throw the body around, where he is a pest. But again, he provides a ton of offense. Tom Wilson's just a larger human, and is a little heavier in terms of it is a little heavier on both scoring and hitting. Michael Bunting is just the same thing in a smaller package and won't provide as much, but is still useful and in that right realm. But the Penguins, you're right. They just have a good surplus of goaltending right now. I think the issue that also holds me back from it is, again, the Penguins like their 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
Jari and Nedeljkovic are doing great, and it does seem like a reclamation year for Nedeljkovic. Who knows what next year really holds for him? So you kind of want to just he also probably just wants to stay in and work through his year and see what the offseason has to offer. The issue the thing about trading goaltenders is, do you have a fourth option? Because that's what you need in reality. Do you have a fourth guy that you can turn to? The Penguins know they have 3. In Jari, Nedeljkovic, and Hellberg. Do they want to all of a sudden have Joel Blomqvist be a third guy? I don't know about that yet. That's where that's because you have to remember, unless you're adding a goalie back, which seems unlikely.
Yeah,
you have to be aware of, now you're thin there. And if anything, the Penguins, if anything for the Penguins last few seasons, is they've used their third string goalie pretty often. They already did it this year. And I think the Penguins like what they have. And as much as Michael Bunting is a player of need, he fits what they need.
Yeah.
That price is just, it's also not a bad price. Don't get me wrong. It's a good price, but it's just not,
especially if it's Hellberg.
Yeah. But it's just not one that the Penguins want to spend.
Yeah. Not to mention that you'd have to do a lot of cap gymnastics to get Michael Bunting under contract. He's currently on a 3-year deal in Carolina, $4.5 million cap hit. That would be hard to squeeze. That would be hard to squeeze into the Pittsburgh Penguins' current salary cap. But he's also, like you said, he's worth the money. He's 26 points in 37 games, 9 goals on the season. He's a guy that brings that sandpaper. He's a guy that has played under a Kyle Dubas team before, so there's a familiarity there. So I see the attraction. I see the desire to bring him in, but I agree with you that right now, obviously, Tristan Jarry has had a history of faltering towards the end of the season, and you need to have a good contingency plan. So far, Alex Nedeljkovic and even Magnus Hellberg have been that contingency plan, and I love Joel Blomqvist. It's not his time.
Not yet.
It is not his time yet. .915 save percentage for Blomqvist in the A in his first year in North America. His first full year in North America, I should say. 231 goals against average and a 9-4-2 record with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Impressive start. Not his time. Maybe next year, if this was a year into the future where Joel Blomqvist was a year further in his progression, maybe you make that move and you're more comfortable with that move and sending out a Hellberg. But I just don't think that the Pittsburgh Penguins are in a position to be trading away a goaltender, even if it's for a guy. I mean, cap numbers aside, because the cap numbers would be nearly impossible to make work. Yeah. Cap numbers aside, a guy in Michael Bunting that would really help the Pittsburgh Penguins in the bottom 6 or even the middle 6, putting him on the second line with Evgeny Malkin could be that would be something to behold. But at the end of the day, I just unfortunately don't see the Pittsburgh Penguins being able to make that swing. So not something that I could see happening.
Just not quite. Again, I like the player. And in fact, I would want Michael Bunting on this team. That'd be a great addition.
Yeah.
I think it would cost more than a Hellberg. I think
it would.
I think Hellberg would end up being the Penguins' backup, and that's kind of why I stopped on the situation. Michael Bunting would be a great addition. And again, it sounds like it could be affordable. A backup goalie, maybe a piece, and maybe you find a way to get some cap retention in there. But then it just leaves you too thin on goaltending.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's an affordable price. It really is. It's just not one the Penguins want to spend right now. Plus, Jari and Nedeljkovic are really pushing each other this year in the same locker room. They really are. They're pushing each other to be better versions of themselves, which is exactly what Jari needed for the Penguins, and it's exactly what Nedeljkovic needed for his career. This could, like I said, maybe next year if Nedeljkovic finds greener pastures on another team and earns a bigger contract, suddenly you're looking at Jari, maybe a different backup because Hellberg's also only on a 1-year deal. And maybe that different backup is Blomqvist.
Maybe.
But then things get interesting because that's your top goalie prospect playing as a backup.
Yeah.
Get ready for a ton of goaltending talk next year, everybody. This offseason and next year.
Yeah, just put an eye up towards Minnesota and what happened with them and Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury. And that's practically what you're going to get in Pittsburgh next season if Joel Blomqvist continues to play the way that he has and Tristan Jarry continues to play the way that he has at the NHL level. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you to everybody for their questions, their listener questions. Like I mentioned before, you can send us listener questions. If you put it in the comment section on YouTube, we'll probably be able to find it. If you do it on Spotify, we'll definitely find it because we get notification on that one. That's in the Q&A section. So, thank you to everybody for sending in questions. It's certainly going to be an interesting next couple of games, big games on the schedule. Penguins versus Bruins later tonight. The Penguins versus the Flyers coming up. And they also have a game against the Sabres in between those two. And Sabres have been pretty good as of late. So we'll have to see what they're able to do in these games, big games in the Eastern Conference. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast from or on YouTube at Inside the Penguins. We'll see you next time.